recording.
Okay, so yeah, we got Chris Harmse, Professor Chris Harmse, Chief Economist at Rebalance Fund Managers, and Dean Furman from 1064 Degrees, an actuary by profession. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. You and I go back many, many years, probably 20 years. And I thought if I'm going to make sense of anything to do with COVID-19 and the effect it's going to have on business and the economy and so on, there's only one person to speak to, and that would be you. So welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, so Chris, COVID-19 in South Africa, we've been into it about 6 weeks now. Where do you see the economy as it stands now? What's happened? Where are we going? Just let's chat a bit.
Mark, I think our economy is likely to go from bad to worse. We were already in a bad place at the end of last year, and well in the first, as well as in the first 2 months before, before the shutdown. We already were told by Moody's that they probably will downgrade us even after the budget speech. So we'll have to go back to the budget speech. During the budget speech, the Minister of Finance forecasted that this economy will still grow at about 0.9% this year. In fact, the World Bank and the IMF also estimated an economic growth rate of about 0.6% this year. That's almost double on last year's 0.3%. And of course, it's still pathetic. If one can put that down. So we will have to take you back a year ago. A year ago, at the end of the fourth quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, we went into a recession. Now, the main reason during that time was we know that we had the blackouts from Eskom. We had a mining sector growing at -11%. And just coming out of the big drought, especially in the Western, Eastern, and Northern Cape, where our agricultural sector shrink by about 12%. So the combination of load shedding, the bailing out of the SOEs, that cost us billions, and those two sectors, South Africa went into a recession. We managed to get out of that, but in the meantime, we still had Eskom as well as the other state enterprises just asking for money more and more and more. Nothing is happening with the previous President Zuma, and nothing happened with state capture. So the grading agencies warned us that if there's no drastic change in the February budget, they're going to downgrade us. So the February budget came, and just after the budget, even though the minister said that he's going to save about 130 billion from the government's coffers, the warning came. So we expected that South Africa will go into a hard time the second and the third quarter of this year. This now without the COVID-19, just as we stood at that stage. Then the devastating figures came out for the economic growth rate of the fourth quarter. -1.4, followed up by a -0.6 of the third quarter. So for the second time in 8 quarters, we were in a recession. So now it's just like a normal man in the street. We've used all our credit card facilities. We've used all our overdrafts, right? The economy is not growing. And government sits with a huge problem of a debt just going into a spiral. So this was the situation at the end of February. This was also the situation when Wuhan was locked down, and before President Ramaphosa announced our lockdown about 27 days later. So when the lockdown came, he had to do 3 things. Number one, with the lockdown, he would have to announce some or other economic plan. We all know, all our economists know, that there wasn't money for an economic plan. We've used up all our overdrafts. Our debt is running away. No bank will borrow us money at that stage. So we had a problem. Where will you get that money from? So He, from various sources, he got this 500 billion rands. We all know that's about 10% of what it should be. We need about 10 times more to save small businesses and to make sure that this economy is not going into a spiral downward movement of unemployment going over 50%. But at least they brought the private sector also onto the screen, and he came up with the lockdown procedures. And what one can give the president to his credit is then in April, when he announced the movement from phase 5 to phase 4, he brought in the phases, and with the phases, it was a very good scientific way in how they're going to approach it. If you look at Stats SA, how Stats SA and the Department of Trade and Industry and the Reserve Bank worked very hard to look at all the sectors of South Africa and to determine the risk factors of all the sectors. And they came up with a model with a lot of, I think it's 12 questions, which will determine the risk of each sector and when this sector will be able to open up again. Because they realize within 3 or 4 weeks, if they're not going to open this economy, there will be more people dying. Apparently, it can be 100% or even 1,000% more than would die from the virus itself. So what I did with that sector, they came up with some risk measurement of the sector. Give you an example: air traveling and restaurants have a number of 18 on a scale. If your scale is lower than 8, you can open again, like the mines. The mines received an 8, right? Some of the other sectors also received an 8 and even lower, so that they could open, in fact, at the beginning of May. So this is where we stood at the beginning of May. The problem we face, Mark, is going forward. We wait for the economic growth rate of the first quarter. For some other strange reason, that figure only will be published on the 30th of June. I don't know why so late. We should have had it now. Normally we get it at the beginning of May. So in other words, they are very careful in publishing that figure from Stats SA. So in other words, all our economists now is guessing. And we must just remember that the economic growth figure that we're going to receive now will be only for the first quarter of 2020. Now remember, the lockdown was only introduced on the 28th of March for all practical reasons, the end of March. So the first quarter, everybody could work. Everyone was at work. There was no lockdown, free movement of people, with the exception, of course, of the airways and some of the borders that were closed down. Even that, we expect an economic growth rate to be as low as -6%. The other devastating figure, which will summarize the dire straits situation, will be the unemployment rate, which will be released on Wednesday. Now, we had a net 29% as it stands. The expectation is in the first quarter, it already had increased to 35%. And if you just then transpolate that towards economic growth versus unemployment, if we're going to have an unemployment rate of -6 to -10% in the second quarter, and even -16% in the third quarter, if we're not going to open this economy, we may see that the unemployment rate can go to 60%. So that's the situation where we stand now. Now, on a positive side, what the government could do was on the monetary policy side from the Reserve Bank. The independence of the Reserve Bank is now well recognized throughout the world, because you know, Mark and Dean, that even the US Federal Reserve is now not anymore independent. The so-called, let's say, war rooms, or we call it the CCC, which took over government, they basically in other countries took over the central banks as well. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in the US, with the exception of South Africa. In South Africa, the Monetary Policy Committee still meet, and they made a decision on how much money they're going to put in the economy, what they're going to do with the interest rates, how they're going to protect South Africa's domestic and external value of the rand. So that's a plus point, and that's why we saw a lot of foreign investors coming back to South Africa over the last month. I will stand still on that point. The second thing about the Reserve Bank is that they lowered the repo rate by 2 basis points. Now, there's a lot of people that say, well, it's a political thing. You know, why did they lower the interest rates? Now, as economists are calling for that move now for more than a year, because for now more of a year, our inflation rate came under 4.5% several months. Well, I've looked over the last 8 months, we were 6 times lower than 4.5%, as low as 3.5%. That already have called for at least 2%. So what the Reserve Bank did, he followed his mandate. When the inflation rate stood at 4% and even lower than 4% over the last 3 months, that was January, February, and March, he lowered the repo rate. So on that area, there's a huge sympathy and a huge support that South Africa have from the rest of the world. So that's the positive side. Let's have a look on the other positive side, right? The other positive side is because China already started to open their economy, right? And their economy already proved last month a net export. There is now a demand for South African resources and also South African agricultural products going to Asia, right? So that's why the president did open in stage 4 the harbors for exporting. So this may help us that our economic growth rate will not be that bad. The last thing about the positive side, and then I can answer more questions. The last thing about the positive side. I just heard from the political analyst from Investec this morning that they're very worried about Europe and the US. They reckon that the US economy will go into a prolonged recession, and the dollar is going to give. And the dollar is going to give to the Chinese yuan. The Chinese yuan already opened their economy and they moved away now. They're not pegged to the dollar anymore. And I reckon that 60% of high-tech goods, which will be produced and exports, now come from China. You know the old saying 10 years ago? In China, we will produce the televisions and the television programs that the Americans will watch. Now it's the other way around. We will produce the television and a television program that our own people will watch. So they're taking over the market. So there is now a feeling that by the end of the year, the dollar will start to crash. So it will bring us a stronger rand, but gold, your gold bulls are talking about a gold price of $3,000. So there are pros and cons. The only thing that worries me is will we allow debts going up and up and up to a certain point, and what will be that a point of return that we have to make a decision, the point of infection and the point of deaths. Are we going to wait till it is 100,000 or 20,000, or when will be the cutoff point where we will have to make a decision to open this economy, or will we wait till the infection rate becomes less than 5% and the death rate less than 1%, and the new infection rate per day less than 100? It seems that that's the ballpark figure. Now I can tell you, Dean, I can tell you, Mark, if we're going to wait for that, we never will open. That's not going to happen. In the meantime, a lot of our economists are now reckon that we may have up to 100,000 people starting to die with hunger if things continue like this, right? If things continue like this. because there is no room for government to introduce now another program of social support. Right? He have that 350 rands a month for those people that don't earn the income. That's it. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing more in the kitty. So there will not be a second round of social grants. When the money is spent, it's spent. So this is our problem. So how long will this economy last? Because if the unemployment rate goes to 50, 60%, the level of poor people in this country, which will not have food, will shut up. So this is what we in as economists call the opportunity cost. How are we going to weigh down people infected and dying with the virus against the economic situation of people getting more and more poor and more people die of hunger. So this is the choice. Now most of us feel that he must get us as quickly as possible on level 3, and he must get us quickly as possible for those provinces which have an infection rate of less than 5%, and there are 4 of them, to open their economy in total, or get him at least back to level 2. If you talk about a Northern Cape, if you talk about Northwest, if you talk about a Limpopo, and if you talk about Mpumalanga, and if you talk about a Free State. The Free State even had the last 2-3 days no new infections. So those provinces we will have to open as quickly as we can. So Mark, it's a question of economics versus health. Or maybe economics versus politics.
And tell me something. When we had our recent chat now, you mentioned the U and the L, the 2 letters. How does that tie in with South Africa at the moment? What do you see happening there? Will it be a U or an L?
Mark, yes. Let's go back to that. First, let's get to the financial markets. That was the other plus point in this economy. And I think we talk about that. The financial markets in South Africa, and we can take all 3 of them. The equity market, the bond market, as well as the foreign exchange market, the exchange rate. We had a very nice classical V formation, starting at the beginning of March, basically the end of February. From February till the middle of March, the South African JSE lost 30% of its value. It came down all the way from 59,000 to 37,000. The rand turned around from 15 rands a dollar to 19 rands a dollar. The leading bond rate in South Africa, the R186, jumped all the way with 3% from 7.8 all the way to 10.8. Right. So this was a reflection of the whole story that I told you about the economy is not growing, the world economy is going into recession. We will downgrade it to junk, and we were then know that we will be cut out of the World Bond Index last week. Right. Then suddenly, as the world started with their huge program of economic stimulation, more than $3 trillion in the US, markets seem to turn around quickly. Because now you're 100% correct. The rest of the world believe that the developed market will have a U shape of recovery. In other words, a strong downturn in economic growth, then a quarter or 2 sideways movement, and then start to lift up. That's a typical U situation. Financial markets have a V situation. The reason why they discount earnings and interest rates already 6 months before. What the problem in South Africa is that I'm very scared about either a W movement in our economy, in other words, going down, recover, and going down again, and then lately up, typically W, or the biggest problem of it all, Mark, and I can't even think what to be the effect of that, and that's an L shape. In other words, coming down from economic growth rates of 3 to -6 and then stay there. So that's our biggest risk. If you have to talk about risk of the South African economy, is it about our economic growth, which will not recover like other countries recover, and eventually then the rand will give. The rand eventually will give. The rand then can go to 20 rands, and then you'll have an effect on inflation, and then interest rates will have to be increased again, and then at the end it will have an effect on our stock market and equities. So the risk then may come from inside. So I'm not so sure if we're going to have a U formation of recovery, and if it's going to be a U formation, the bottom part may last for a year. That's my problem. In fact, the president warned last night that this may happen, that we may have an economic recession, which in layman's terms became a depression, if that thing lasts for a year. So now we're not in a recession anymore. Now we're in a depression. So we will have to evaluate the L formation as well as the V form, the U formation.
And now,
sorry.
No, and Chris, when we spoke also, you mentioned, I know you mentioned just now, mining and agriculture. Those two, you say, we're in a good spot there.
Mark, yes, you know, no, from an optimistic view, I still believe that if you can get our agricultural sector going, we know that in a summer crop area, all the farmers with their maize and soybeans apparently is going to have almost a record crop, and it's not so sure. It's not so sure that the yield, in other words, an 8 tons a hectare or 6 tons a hectare, but it's the price. You know, giving the rand at 18 rand and 30-40 cents. You know these maize prices is more than double than a year ago. You know, going 4,000 and even higher. White maize is going at 5,000 rand and even higher. But then of course all the other agricultural products as well. Farmers are telling us that they have a bumper of a year. So that may help. And then also, if the Chinese economy is opening quickly and they start to produce the motor cars again, in fact they already do, the demand for platinum and aluminium and palladium is in the process of going up, and we will see also a growing demand for steel and coal as well. So exporting of those products, and then of course our champion gold. If gold only going to stay like now, you know, most of these mines are now making profit. If you look at the share price of almost all our gold mines, Anglo American, Gold Ashanti. If you look at all our gold mines, their share prices have increased 15-20% since the beginning of the year. If you just look at the resources index, now that have recovered over the last month or so. So yes, I hope that those two sectors, they were the reason why we went into recession last year. I hope they will be the reason why we can move out of the recession with a U shape, with the leg pulling us by the fourth quarter and first quarter of next year to growth rates of 4-5% again.
Sure. Now tell me, Chris, what about the little business guy, the small man? I mean, you know, I know the big corporates have been hit, but the little guys, you know, how did they respond to this crisis? You know, 1 month of no business, no sales, huge expenses. This can cripple the average small business. How, you know, what's the, you know, and I think you mentioned earlier that it's a small business that creates so many jobs, you know, in the economy. What happens? What advice do you give to the small, or what picture do you paint for the small businessman?
Well, let's go first to the picture. If you're not going to move to level 3 and 2 quickly, there's basically nothing that small businesses can do. We will not have also enough money to bail them out. Then basically, you know, you can't give them any advice. There are already signs of the dire straits and the big problems in some of the small businesses. Give you an example. everyone that comes to go to Cape Town will visit Hout Bay, right? And all of you will go and eat on that there on that waterfront.
Yeah.
What's that place name? Okay, I will come to his name now.
Yeah.
He said early in this week that he's not only going to shut his doors, he's now closing down forever, right? So that's a well-known landmark in South Africa. That restaurant is now closing down, and it's only a month into the lockdown, right? Now, you must just remember, Mark, that the tourism industry in South Africa became the third biggest sector after services and manufacturing, right? So they're bigger than mining, they're bigger than agricultural sector, right? So they became quite a big sector. Now, the tourism at this stage are standing still, and you know that they create more jobs than agricultural sector, almost the same as the mining sector. So for those industries, the hospitality industry, all our game parks, all those tourism, small medium-sized enterprises, even the informal small enterprises, if they're not going to recover in the next 3 months, we're going to lose them. That's the first thing. So we will have to look very, very, very narrow towards that industries and how we're going to help them. I know some of the big insurance companies now are starting to work towards that goal. I know Investec is one of them, starting to bail out of those small business enterprises. But then the second thing here, Mark, the problem that we have is that if the small business enterprises will start up again, we're going to see a different economy, right? We're going to see a different economy. Something like online shopping. Online shopping will become the future, and the small business can do that, almost like Uber did. Yes. Right? Yes. Right. So industries that's making face masks, you know, industries that can provide online marketing. In other words, the fourth industrialized revolution is now quicker on us. So if a small business can be innovative and make use of those chances, you know, we can have a new economy. Give you an example. Apparently in the US, right, in that first week where they lost almost 4 million new jobs, Amazon, right, hired 500,000 new workers. Why? Because everyone in the US locked down online shopping, right? So the one industry, some of the industries like the restaurants, etc., you know, they were in dire straits. But one industry, and that is the online shopping, you know, they are making a lot of money and they employ a lot of people. Apparently in states like Dallas and some of the other states, Amazon, very clever, they hire all the waiters and waitresses from restaurants. They started to employ them, because if you can be a waiter or a waitress, you can go to a storage room and you can do packing. So this is how they changed their economy.
So I'm pleased you mentioned the fourth industrial, because that's what, you know, that's, as you know, that's what Dean's is known for in this country. Digital disruption, fourth industrial revolution. He deals with all the big corporates on that. Dean, your points on the fourth industrial revolution, the fact that it's now been sped up, hasn't it?
Yes, but I find it so interesting, everything that you say. But also the thing that I've seen a lot of companies have started to do now is look to digitize everything, which further sometimes causes problem for the workers, because they're like, well, we can't be so reliant on humans, we got to start digitizing, but that naturally starts to replace people even more, and then jobs become you know, even more scarce. I don't know what your thinking around that is.
Well, yeah, yes, Dean, that's true. For especially in the property sector, because more and more people will not go back to their houses at all. Big corporates also going to do the same. In the US, it is so that most of the big corporates, 30 to 40% of their workforce are now working only 2 days a week at office. So office space and all those linked down the supply chain, people are going to suffer. Definitely. Delivering, all those things. If you only look at universities, for instance, if you look at universities
stationary
like
businesses.
Stationary businesses for universities, because students are now buying everything online. They're buying the e-books. They get their programs online. So in other words, there's a lot of these industries that suddenly that work quite labor intensive will have to change. But that's the thing about the fourth industrial revolution. The other thing about what we have to worry is our school system. Our education system is by far not geared for the fourth industrial revolution, especially in the rural areas. Up to now, education and on primary and secondary school level were already in dire straits. They were already in such a bad shape that they couldn't even cope with the third industrial revolution. People that don't even know how to work a online computer, how to go into the internet, how to go make use of Excel, etc. Now they that far behind. So Dean, you're 100% correct. There may be job opportunities, but people will not be skilled for that.
And tell me, Chris, the one thing is, I look at what's happening now, and for ages now, I've been trying to get my clients to move to things like Zoom and to video conferencing, be it in surveys we do, be it in appointments, meetings, and they were resistant. Now everyone's doing it because it was an old South African thing, wasn't it? We get in the car, we put our arm out the window, and we'd like to drive. And now we can't do that anymore. And now people are realizing there's no need to do it. Let's rather be at home. Let's rather work from home, working remotely rather from the office. Both Dean and I have done that for many, many, many years. The other thing that we've both done is we have both used an outsourcing model where our contract model where anyone working for us is on contract. So when you do have a time like this, you're suddenly not worrying about huge expenses for your rentals, your offices, for your staff. In other words, going that sort of almost a virtual existence. Do you see that happening? A lot of that happening now?
Definitely. We will have a virtual world. If you look in our sector, the financial sector and the financial and professional services sector, that's all your lawyers, even some of the medical doctors, but even your lawyers, accountants, tax, our financial advisors. They are all going virtual now. And I can tell you, Mark, we're doing more than we did before. Yeah. We're working longer and harder hours than before. So it is happening. So the thing about South Africa is how are we going to face this new virtual world? And your small business that can adapt the quickest, right, will be the industry which will, of course, grow the fastest, and whose employers, of course, will get the higher level of income. If you take, for instance, at universities now, it was accounting, very popular, and then Dean, of course, your agricultural, actuarial services. You know what's the popular kit on the block now? It's logistics.
Yeah.
Logistics now is now mushrooming because there's a lot of jobs now in logistics. Just look around the airport. Just look around the airport. The online trading and the online, because people are still going to buy things. They're still going to buy food. They're still going to buy clothes. They're still going to buy furniture. So there will always be a demand for that. But it's the way in which the virtual shop will work. So we will have virtual businesses coming out of this. And if you cannot cope there, I'm afraid you're going to, you're going to stay behind.
Now, Chris, if you were to give one bit of advice to business people out there, just one little bit of advice, what would that be?
Get your people together, start a new business model. The old business model is not going to work. It doesn't matter if you, even if you a general practitioner with your practice, it's not going to be the same. It's going to change. So we need new business plans. Okay, but Mark, given what we said this afternoon, there's one thing that worries me about the South Africa from the political side. And if you allow me, I want to show you only 2 slides that
Sure.
I think can summarize everything. Let me see if I can just load them down. Let me get in here. Share that screen. It's not that one. There it is. That's the first one. That's the first one we will have to look on for the country as a whole.
It hasn't come on yet, Chris. That's
okay. Right. I just put it on.
No.
Just share it again.
Sure.
Here we are now. Right. What will happen with the stimulus fund? Will that stimulus fund do what it should do? Will the government have the capacity to bring out that stimulus fund? This is what worries a lot of us. So I think that cartoon say everything. Right. This is the first thing. The second thing which we will have to look on is that's it. I just want to get this thing, the second one. And I think this one also summarizes it. Get the right one here. This one, sorry.
No problem.
Now. Right, there it is.
Yeah.
So those 2 things. Now, to come back to you, how will the small business adapt to the fact that he thought he can get help from the government, but it's not working out? He can't get any support. The second thing is, if we're going to live with this thing in a bigger tsunami recession, how are you going to cope with that? So for me, those are the 2 things. So you have to come up with a new business plan, a new business model to cope with a prolonged recession.
Okay.
I think that's the challenge.
Okay. So I think from my side, I just want to say thank you to you, to Dean. Chris, it's always a pleasure listening to you.
Amazing.
20 years later, we've gone a long way, you and myself and your team, Vaynant and Quinton, and we go back a hell of a long way, on a social basis, on a business basis. I've got a saying that, you're the average of it's not mine, it's just a saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. You've just brought up the averages so high. Thank you so much, and
thank you,
all the best, and be safe.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.